Captain Lysander Vex woke up to the screeching alarm of an incoming transmission. Again, because why not of a day where even your coffee refuses to brew without a fight? He rubbed his eyes, the rough stubble on his chin scraping against his palm. Morning, Dualis, he muttered to his otherwise inanimate quarters. The planet had been called Dualis because the idiots who named it had a flair for the obvious. A planet divided by an ancient war, split right down the middle like a cosmic divorce settlement, now with a human colony awkwardly straddling the border like an irritating pimple. Vex pulled on his uniform, which was as far from pristine as the grubby walls of his quarters. He glanced out the window at the barren landscape, where the two halves of the planet seemed to actively hate each other. One side a scorched desert, the other a frozen wasteland. Pick your poison. But hey, at least it wasn't Earth. That mudball was so last millennium. Stumbling into the command center, Vex was greeted by Lieutenant Marlowe, his second-in-command, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was hunched over the console, eyes flickering between multiple screens like someone trying to juggle chainsaws on roller skates. "Morning, Cap, looks like we've got company," she said without looking up. Vex sighed. What is it this time? More of those lovely local fauna trying to eat our defenses? Or did the ice side decide they want a piece of the sunburn action? Neither. It's the Krillin Accord, Marlowe replied, her voice as dry as the desert outside. Vex groaned. Fantastic, the Krillin Accord. Because why should today be anything other than a complete cluster? Yeah, Marlowe cut him off, finally looking up. Her eyes were like two burnt holes in a blanket, but with a spark of humor that said she'd seen it all and was unimpressed. The Krillin Accord, a charming confederation of alien species whose diplomatic strategy was to bombard first and ask questions never. They were about as welcome as a bout of explosive decompression. What are we looking at, Marlowe? A fleet. Sizable. Enough firepower to turn this place into an even bigger waste of space. Vex leaned over the console, squinting at the holographic display. A cluster of red dots moving toward the planet like a swarm of angry bees. And here I was thinking my day couldn't get any worse. Always aim low, sir. Then you're never disappointed. Good advice, Vex replied, trying to figure out how to deal with an alien armada before breakfast. Any chance they just took a wrong turn at the cosmic roundabout and will be on their way soon unlikely. They're broadcasting their usual cheerful ultimatum. Vex rolled his eyes. Let me guess, surrender or die. Or maybe they're just here for a friendly cup of tea, closer to the former, but without the option of tea figures. All right, let's see what these charmers have to say, Vex grumbled, punching a button to open the communication channel. The screen flickered to life, revealing the reptilian visage of a Krillin commander. Its scales were a sickly green, and its eyes were the color of rancid meat. Humans of Dualis, it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. You are trespassing on Krillin territory. Surrender your colony and prepare for assimilation. Resistance is futile, Vex smirked. Resistance is a hobby of Ior's, keeps us busy between meals. The Krillin commander blinked slowly, possibly recalculating its threat level rating. This is your only warning. Comply or face obliteration. Look, Vex said, leaning back in his chair with the relaxed air of a man who's just realized he's out of coffee but still too lazy to do anything about it. We're not really the surrendering type. Kind of goes against our nature. How about you turn around and we pretend this never happened? The Krillin's eyes narrowed to slits. The universal sign for you're on my last nerve. You have two standard Iors to comply. The screen blinked off before Vex could fashion a retort. Charming fellow, Marlowe said, deadpan. If I had a credit for every time I heard prepare for assimilation, I'd have enough to retire to somewhere nice. Like a black hole, Vex rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the migraine that was already forming. All right, let's get the defense systems online, and maybe send out a notice. Today's weather forecast, fire and despair. Bring your umbrellas, Marlowe smirked, a rare expression on her usually stoic face. I'll see what I can do. The command center buzzed with activity, a chaotic symphony of people who all realized their day was about to get significantly worse. Vex watched them work, his own fingers itching to do something useful, but he knew better than to micromanage. Hands-off was his style. Well, hands-off mixed with a healthy dose of sarcasm. Captain Marlowe called. Our long-range sensors picked up something else. Another fleet, but it's not Krillin. It's unknown. Vex raised an eyebrow. Great, just what we need. A mystery guest. Maybe they're here to save us, or maybe they just want to watch us squirm. Place your bets, Marlowe replied, ever the optimist. Vex considered the odds. Knowing our luck, they're probably just here to sell us extended warranties. The thought of facing two unknown fleets made his stomach churn. But sitting around and whining about it wasn't going to help. Okay, double the patrols. Make sure everyone's armed to the teeth, and maybe remind them that humanity's a stubborn son of a bitch. Marlowe nodded and turned to relay the orders. Vex leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I wonder if they have a return policy on colonial planets, he mused aloud. If they do, it's probably buried under terms and conditions may apply, Marlowe said over her shoulder. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, until an eternity seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. The tension was thick enough to choke on, a silent hum in the air that set Vex's nerves on edge. Then, the sensors blared to life again. Vex snapped his attention back to the console. What now? He muttered to himself. Marlowe stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. The Second Fleet. It's hailing us. Vex's eyebrows shot up. Hailing us? Well, isn't that polite? Let's see what they've got to say before we roll out the welcome mat. The screen flickered, and the image of a humanoid figure appeared. A woman, or at least something very much like one. Her skin was a deep, shimmering blue, her eyes a piercing silver that seemed to see right through the monitor and into Vex's soul. Greetings, humans of Dualis. We come in peace. Vex couldn't help himself. You know, your timing's impeccable. We were just talking about our surrender options. The woman smiled, an expression that seemed genuine, though who the hell could tell with aliens? We have no intention of conquest. We wish to offer assistance. Vex leaned forward, intrigued. Assistance, against the Krillin, and what's the catch? No catch. We have our own quarrels with the Krillin and see an opportunity to align interests. I see. So it's the enemy of my enemy and all that, she nodded. Precisely. We can provide tactical support and resources, but your people must be willing to stand and fight. Vex nodded slowly, weighing his options. Two fleets, one a known menace, the other an unknown variable. But allies were scarce in the galaxy, and beggars couldn't be choosers. All right, let's talk terms. And if you're planning any double crosses, keep in mind we're the stubborn ones. We know, she replied, her smile widening. And that's precisely why we're here. As the screen blinked off again, Vex turned to Marlowe. Well, things just got interesting. Let's see if our new friends are as helpful as they are shiny, Marlowe chuckled. If not, at least it'll be an entertaining disaster. Vex laughed, the sound echoing through the command center. Isn't it always? He stood, clapping Marlowe on the back. Prep the crew. We've got an unexpected party to host, and I'd hate to be a bad host. The command center buzzed louder as preparations were made. Vex felt a familiar thrill run through him. The thrill of the unknown, of standing against impossible odds with nothing but hope, sarcasm, and stubborn grit. Let's show them what humans are made of, he muttered to himself, a wry grin on his face. Even if it's just blood, sweat, and caffeine. And as the Krillin fleet edged ever closer, and the unknown allies loomed large on the horizon, Captain Lysander Vex knew one thing for certain. Today was going to be a hell of a day. Vex rubbed his temples like he was trying to erase a bad tattoo. He needed a plan, preferably one that didn't involve getting vaporized. Outside, the barren expanse of Dualis mocked him with its dual nature, and inside, he had a ship full of people who looked to him to keep them alive. No pressure. He gathered his motley crew in the conference room, which was really just a closet with delusions of grandeur. It smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. The table was scarred with the tales of 1,000 failed plans, and Vex was about to add another chapter. Right, Vex began, looking over his ragtag ensemble. We've got the Krillin Accord breathing down our necks, and some potentially friendly blue people offering help. Thoughts, suggestions. Sarcastic comments. Phaedra Quill, their strategic analyst, leaned back in her chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd seen the universe's worst and wasn't impressed. Her hair was a shade of aubergine that dared the universe to comment on it. She was sharp enough to cut through a hull with her analysis, which was why Vex kept her around. Captain, we're sitting on a powder keg while holding a lit match. The Krillin cut off our supply lines faster than a tax audit cancels a holiday. We can't hold out long without resupply, Quill said, her voice a smooth blend of sarcasm and reality. Charming visual, Vex replied, drumming his fingers on the table. Terran, any ideas on how we can stretch our resources? Or is that asking for a miracle on a budget? Terran Fex, the ship's engineer and unofficial miracle worker, scratched his chin, forehead lined like a topographical map. His uniform bore the scars of 100 patch jobs, each one a testament to his ingenuity and the ship's stubborn refusal to cooperate. If they get any closer, we can try rigging the ship's reactors to broadcast a heat signature like a supernova, Terran suggested. Might scare 'em off or at least give them a case of interstellar indigestion. Supernova, huh? You really know how to make a girl feel special, Vex replied, quirking an eyebrow. But I'm guessing that's as dangerous as it sounds, only if you like your atoms rearranged into a Jackson Pollock, Terran shrugged. But hey, desperate times, right? Vex nodded, appreciating the irony that their survival might depend on convincing the Krillin they were more trouble than they were worth. All right, we'll file that under last resort. Quill, any magic on your end? Quill tapped a finger on her chin, gazing at a spot on the ceiling that had become her unofficial think tank. The Krillin operate on fear and power. If we can manage to disrupt their communication, make them think we've got more allies than we do, it might buy us some time, so, A cosmic game of cat and mouse where we're the mouse with a very convincing roar, Vex asked. More or less, Quill replied. Vex leaned back in his chair, the weight of command pressing down like a bad hangover. All right, I like it. Let's give them the impression that we're not the easy target they think we are. Marlowe, I want you to start organizing shifts. We need eyes on every screen and fingers on every trigger. Marlowe nodded, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of impending doom. Consider it done. I'll also see if we can jury-rig some decoy signals. Maybe make them think we've got a couple of capital ships in orbit. Good, Vex said. And someone get that damn coffee machine working. I refused to face the apocalypse without caffeine. The group dispersed, each person moving with a purpose that belied the chaos outside. Vex lingered for a moment, staring at the empty conference room. The silence was a tangible thing, heavy and oppressive, like the universe was holding its breath. Well, Dualis, let's see what you've got for us today, he muttered, heading back to the command center. The Krillin siege was as effective as it was relentless. The planet's surface was dotted with the glowing remnants of their orbital bombardment, like some cosmic acne outbreak. Each blast was a reminder of their precarious position, each flash a strobe light at their own funeral. Vex stood at the command center's helm, watching the fleet of angry red dots on the holographic display. They were drawing closer, like a swirling storm cloud ready to swallow their tiny oasis whole. Captain, the Krillin are tightening the noose, Marlowe reported, her voice calm but urgent. We've lost contact with outposts 4, 6, and 9. Fantastic, Vex replied, his sarcasm a shield against the mounting pressure. Any word from our blue friends, or are they just here for moral support? They've sent over some schematics for unfamiliar tech, Quill said, stepping up beside him. Her expression was a mix of intrigue and caution. It looks like advanced cloaking technology, but implementing it in time will be like trying to build a space station out of paper clips. Terran appeared beside her, already tracing the schematics with a fervor only an engineer could muster. I love a challenge, he said, eyes gleaming with a dangerous excitement. Let's see if we can't make this work before we're reduced to cosmic dust. That's the spirit, Vex said with a half-grin. Go work your magic, Terran, and try not to blow us up in the process. Yeah, the engineer nodded, already deep in thought, muttering about transducers and thermal stress as he left the room. Captain Marlowe interrupted, a note of urgency creeping into her voice. The Krillin are launching fighters. Vex cursed under his breath, the weight of command pressing down on him like a 1,000-gallon jug of bad decisions. All right, let's keep them busy. Prep the fighters, scramble the interceptors. Quill, keep working on that communication disruption plan. We need every edge we can get. The command center erupted into action, a whirlwind of activity as everyone moved to their stations. The air crackled with tension, each person acutely aware that their survival hung on the razor's edge of luck, skill, and sacrificial bravado. The first wave of Krillin fighters hit the atmosphere like a swarm of locusts, their sleek forms slicing through the sky with lethal precision. Vex watched the display, the red blips merging and separating, a deadly ballet of destruction. Intercept Group Alpha launch, Vex ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding. Let's give them a warm welcome. The roar of engines filled the air as the ship's defense forces launched, streaking across the sky like angry comets. Vex's heart raced, a mix of fear and adrenaline that had become all too familiar. The battle began in earnest, a chaotic dance of ships twisting and turning in the air. Explosions lit up the sky, brief flowers of fire that were as beautiful as they were deadly. Vex watched the display, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Reports coming in, Marlowe said, her voice a lifeline in the storm. We're holding them off, but they're persistent. They always are, Vex replied, his gaze fixed on the display. Increase coverage on the left flank. We can't let them break through. As the battle raged, time seemed to stretch and compress, a fractal of moments that merged into a single, pulsing heartbeat. Vex felt the weight of command heavier than ever, each decision a stone on his soul. Captain, the cloaking tech is ready for a test. Terran's voice crackled over the intercom, a thread of hope in the darkness. It's not perfect, but it might just give us the edge we need. Vex nodded, though only the empty room bore witness. Do it, Terran. Let's see if we can make ourselves invisible to these bastards. The ship shuddered as the cloaking system engaged, a low hum resonating through the hull. For a moment nothing happened, then the Krillin fighters seemed to hesitate, their formation breaking as though trying to comprehend an enemy that was no longer there. It's working, Quill said, her voice tinged with disbelief and relief. They're confused, looking for targets. Good. Let's use this to our advantage, Vex replied, a grim smile on his face. Keep them chasing ghosts and focus on clearing the ones that are still too close for comfort. The battle continued, each moment a knife's edge of survival. But slowly the tide began to turn. The Krillin fighters, disoriented and scattered, found themselves on the defensive. The humans, against all odds, were holding their ground. Captain, it's working, Marlowe said, a hint of triumph in her voice. We're pushing them back, then let's keep pushing, Vex replied, feeling a flicker of hope in his chest. Today's a good day to remind the universe that we're not easy prey. Vex watched as the Krillin fighters retreated, their once imposing formation reduced to a handful of desperate blips on the screen. The humans had survived another day, though the cost was a ledger they'd yet to fully tally. As the command center settled into a tense quiet, Vex took a moment to breathe. The battle was far from over, and the Krillin would return, angrier and more determined than ever. But for now, they had earned a brief reprieve. Marlowe, get the status reports, Vex ordered, his voice weary but resolved, and someone find out if the coffee machine's working yet. I need something stronger than hope to keep me going. As his crew moved to obey, he allowed himself a rare moment of levity, a wry smile playing at his lips. Well, Dualis, you've managed to survive another day. Let's see if we can make it interesting tomorrow. He leaned back, letting the tension ease from his shoulders. The Krillin siege had begun, and the humans of Dualis were standing their ground, for better or worse. Vex knew the fight was far from over, but in that moment, surrounded by his crew in the chaos of survival, he allowed himself to believe they might just have a fighting chance. For now, at least, they had each other, and sometimes that meant more than any weapon or strategy. As long as they could laugh in the face of doom, they were still alive. And for Captain Lysander Vex, that was a victory worth celebrating. The Krillin Accord wasn't known for their subtlety. Their idea of psychological warfare was like trying to convince a toddler of the tooth fairy with a sledgehammer. It started with the propaganda broadcasts, the kind of condescending drivel that made you want to hurl your breakfast at the wall, if they'd had breakfast, or a working coffee machine. Captain Lysander Vex stood at the helm, watching the grainy images flicker across the command center's main screen. The Krillin voice, all oily persuasion painted over an alien rasp, droned on about the futility of resistance and the joys of surrender. It was like listening to a bad self-help tape, but with more explosions. Turn that crap off, Vex said, rubbing his temples. I've got enough headaches without listening to them explain how we're all doomed. Lieutenant Marlowe, ever the multitasker, fiddled with the controls, her sleep-deprived eyes rolling like dice. Do you think they use the same script for every invasion, or do they just ad-lib this garbage? Bet they charge extra for custom insults, Vex replied, folding his arms. But hey, at least we've got prime seating for the galaxy's worst motivational seminar. Phaedra Quill, who'd somehow managed to look both annoyed and intrigued, tapped away at her console. Her aubergine hair caught the dim light, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, fashion could still make a statement. We could use their signal against them, you know. Turn their broadcasting into a distraction. How do you distract people with what sounds like a drunken uncle at a wedding? Vex asked. Simple, Quill replied with a grin. We jam their signal intermittently, make it seem like we've got our own messages coming through, keep them guessing who's controlling the airwaves. Like a cosmic game of who's got the remote, I like it. Vex nodded. Make it happen, Marlowe, clearly enjoying the idea, pitched in. We could throw in some classic tunes, maybe. A little We Will Rock You to remind them what they're dealing with. Or Highway to Hell for a more accurate vibe, Vex added dryly. Terran Fex, who had just sauntered in from his engineering wonderland, caught the tail end of the conversation. If you're talking music, I've got an old stash of Earth classics we could use. Just say the word. Great, Vex said. Let's make sure the Krillin know we're not just a bunch of spineless rodents. We've got culture, an attitude. Terran, ever the enthusiastic engineer, was already lost in thought, possibly compiling a playlist of tunes to annoy the Krillin into submission. I'll get on it, he said, disappearing back into his lair of wires and dreams. As the crew bustled around the command center, Vex took a moment to reflect. Psychological warfare wasn't just about broadcasting fear. It was about sowing discord, making people doubt their every move. If the Krillin could make the humans panic, they'd won before the first shot was fired. But Dualis wasn't about to panic. They'd been through worse, and Vex knew that sometimes survival was about reminding yourself why you were fighting in the first place. Vex turned his attention back to the main screen, where Marlowe was already busy implementing Quill's counter-strategy. How long until we can start jamming their signal? Already on it, Marlowe said, her fingers flying across the console. Give me another 5 minutes, and we'll have the Krillin wondering if their reality is on the fritz. Good, Vex said. Nothing like a little existential crisis to keep the enemy busy. Quill's expression shifted from thoughtful to mischievous, her analytical mind whirring like a finely tuned machine. We can also use our decoy signals to amplify their confusion. Make them think we've got reinforcements on the way, like telling a bully you've got an older brother who lifts weights. Vex grinned. I love it. Let's keep them looking over their shoulders. The Krillin Accord had underestimated them, Vex realized. They saw humans as weak, easily manipulated, but humans were adaptable, resourceful, and above all, stubbornly difficult to crush. As Marlowe worked her magic on the controls, the Krillin's propaganda broadcast began to cut in and out, replaced sporadically by bursts of static and the opening chords of Eye of the Tiger. Vex couldn't help but chuckle. If they were going down, they'd do it with style. Reports from the ground, Marlowe said, glancing at Vex. Morale's still low, but people are starting to catch on to the Krillin's game. If we keep this up, we might prevent a full-blown panic. Good, Vex said, the knot in his chest loosening slightly. Let's keep them guessing. The longer we hold out, the better our chances. The Krillin fighters continued their assault, but something had shifted. Their movements were less coordinated, more erratic, as if they couldn't quite figure out what was happening. The humans of Dualis were still outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one thing the Krillin lacked: unpredictability. Vex watched the display, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in days, hope didn't feel like a fool's errand. Captain, incoming transmission from the Blue Guys, Marlowe said, pointing to a blinking icon on the screen. About time, Vex muttered. Patch it through. The screen flickered, and the serene image of a blue-skinned diplomat filled the display, their expression the kind of calm that came from either deep wisdom or just not giving a damn. Captain Vex, we have observed your current predicament with interest. Yeah, well, glad someone finds this entertaining, Vex replied, his voice a mix of sarcasm and barely contained frustration. What can you do for us? The diplomat blinked slowly, as if processing the human concept of urgency. We can offer strategic guidance and limited resources. Our technology is superior, but our direct involvement would breach several accords. Diplomacy, Vex said, the art of helping without actually helping. The diplomat inclined their head, acknowledging the truth in the statement. We can, however, disrupt Krillin's supply lines, a subtle sabotage, if you will. Vex felt a grin creeping across his face. We'll take what we can get, anything to make their lives as miserable as ours. We shall commence operations shortly, the diplomat said. May fortune favor your endeavors. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in a momentary silence. Well, Quill said, at least they're not just watching from the sidelines with popcorn. Vex shook his head, seeing the humor in their absurd situation. No, they're just giving us a few rocks to throw while they keep their hands clean. With the Krillin's psychological assault wavering, the humans gained ground, their countermeasures slowly but surely turning the tide. The crew rallied, their spirits buoyed by small victories and the knowledge that their plight was not invisible to the universe. Captain, Marlowe called, drawing Vex's attention back to the task at hand, the decoy signals are holding. The Krillin are still chasing shadows. Good, Vex replied, feeling the pressure of command shift slightly off his shoulders. Let's keep them in the dark as long as we can. The Krillin fighters continued their assault, but their confusion was palpable. The humans were no longer just surviving. They were fighting back with wit and tenacity. For every blow the Krillin landed, the humans returned too, each act of defiance a rallying cry against the encroaching darkness. Vex stood at the helm, a sense of determination coursing through him. Dualis was still there, still fighting, a stubborn speck of resistance in a vast, uncaring universe. They'd been battered, bruised, and mocked, but they hadn't broken. As the battle continued, Vex couldn't help but feel a strange sense of camaraderie with his crew. They were an odd bunch, thrown together by circumstance and necessity, but they'd become something more. A family of misfits united against a common foe. And for the first time in a long time, Vex dared to hope that they'd make it through, not just because of luck or fate, but because they'd earned it through grit, determination, and a refusal to go quietly into the night. But for now, Vex allowed himself a moment of levity. Who needs caffeine when you've got adrenaline and a Krillin blockade to deal with, right? Marlowe chuckled, shaking her head. Still, if someone could get that coffee machine working, I wouldn't complain. Vex grinned, feeling the weight of the universe lift, if only for a moment. Let's focus on surviving the apocalypse first, then we'll worry about caffeine. As the chaos unfolded, the crew of Dualis continued their fight, each moment a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. They were flawed, imperfect, and utterly determined, and for Captain Lysander Vex, that was more than enough. The Krillin Accord had underestimated the humans, but they'd learn, because on Dualis, survival wasn't just a necessity, it was an art form, and if the Krillin wanted to dance, they'd find that the humans were more than willing to lead. The sound of the Krillin fighters approaching was a bit like listening to an orchestra made up entirely of chainsaws and broken dreams. Captain Lysander Vex stood in the command center, eyes scanning the readouts like a desperate gambler eyeing a roulette wheel, hoping that fate had maybe, just this once, decided to be in a generous mood. The Krillin are coming in hot, Marlowe said, her sleep-deprived eyes glued to the console. Looks like they finally got tired of just yapping at us. They're going for full-on assault. About damn time, Vex muttered. I was starting to think they were all bark and no bite. Now we get to see how sharp their teeth really are. Phaedra Quill, ever the problem solver with a knack for creative chaos, leaned over the console. We need to keep them at bay, but we're running low on almost everything. Ideas enter Terran Fex, the ship's engineer and resident miracle worker. He sauntered into the command center, looking like a man who'd just solved a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. I might have something, he said with a grin that suggested he was about to do something either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. But it involves some, unconventional engineering. Unconventional is our middle name, Vex replied. What are you thinking? Remember those old maintenance drones we've got rusting away in storage? Terran asked, eyes alight with mischief. I've been retooling them. Little tweaks here and there, couple of boosters, some plasma cutters. We launch them at the Krillin ships and let them do what they do best, tear things apart. Marlowe looked at him, eyebrows raised. So, our defense strategy is mechanical piranhas, exactly, Terran said. Plus, they're small and fast, hard to target. If we time it right, we can disrupt their formations, give our weapons a chance to do some damage. Vex nodded, feeling hope flicker like a candle in a hurricane. Let's do it. The Krillin think they can just roll over us. Time to show them we've got a few surprises left. As Terran dashed off to his engineering den, the atmosphere in the command center shifted. There was tension, sure, but also a sense of grim determination. They were backed into a corner, but that just made them more dangerous. Krillin ships are in range, Marlowe announced. Prepare to engage. The colony's defenses roared to life, lasers lancing into the void with all the subtlety of an angry bear. The Krillin ships responded in kind, their weapons spitting fire across the black canvas of space. Terran's makeshift drones shot out like a swarm of angry hornets, buzzing towards the enemy with all the enthusiasm of a teenager who'd just discovered caffeine. They latched onto the Krillin ships, slicing and dicing with reckless abandon. Looks like your Frankendrones are doing their job, Quill observed, a hint of admiration in her voice. Well, they say necessity is the mother of invention, Vex replied, but I'm pretty sure desperation is its crazy uncle. The drones darted around, wreaking havoc and forcing the Krillin fighters to break formation. It was a small victory, but in this game of cosmic chess, every piece mattered. A sudden explosion rocked the command center, the lights flickering like a disco ball at a particularly rowdy party. Vex grabbed onto the nearest console, steadying himself as alarms screamed their warnings. Shields are holding, but only just, Marlowe said. We're running on fumes here, Vex grimaced. The colony was holding on by its fingernails, and the Krillin weren't about to back off just because things got a bit sporty. What's the status of the other systems? Life support's stable for now, Marlowe replied. Weapons are. Well, let's just say we're down to the galactic equivalent of throwing rocks. Could be worse, Vex said, trying to keep the tone light, though his insides churned like a washing machine stuck on spin cycle. We could be out of rocks. Phaedra, any luck with those decoy signals? Vex asked, shifting gears. If they couldn't outgun the Krillin, maybe they could outsmart them. It's a work in progress, Quill said, fingers flying over the console. But I've got a few surprises left up my sleeve. Just give me a bit more time. Time, the one thing they were always running out of. Vex swallowed the knot of anxiety tightening in his throat. We'll take whatever you can give us. Meanwhile, Terran's drones continued their assault, gnawing at the Krillin ships like metal termites. It was a sight to behold, and even in the midst of chaos, Vex couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. His crew was making a stand, against all odds, turning desperation into innovation. Incoming transmission from one of the Krillin ships, Marlowe said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Vex raised an eyebrow, put it through. Let's see what they want to yell about. The screen blinked to life, displaying the visage of a Krillin commander, looking like someone who'd just bitten into a particularly sour lemon. Human vessel, the commander snarled. Your resistance is futile. Surrender now and spare yourselves further suffering. Vex leaned back, adopting a casual posture that screamed defiance. Thanks for the offer, but we've grown rather fond of our suffering. Besides, your definition of futile and ours might differ a little. The Krillin commander's expression darkened, his patience clearly worn thin. Your defiance is pointless. You cannot win. Probably, Vex admitted with a shrug, but winning isn't everything. Sometimes it's about making sure the other guy doesn't get to strut around acting all smug. The Krillin cut the transmission, and Vex turned back to his crew, a lopsided grin on his face. I think we might have annoyed them. Good, Marlowe said. Annoyed enemies make mistakes. The battle raged on, a fiery ballet of destruction as both sides traded blows. The colony's defenses were pushed to their limits, every shot a gamble, every maneuver a desperate bid to stay alive. And yet, despite the odds, they held on. Terran's drones danced among the stars, a testament to human ingenuity and a refusal to give up. Phaedra's decoy signals added to the chaos, leaving the Krillin scrambling, their frustration palpable. Resource status? Vex asked, knowing he wouldn't like the answer but needing it anyway. Marlowe checked the systems, her expression grim. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel. We've got maybe a few hours of full combat operations left before we're tapped out. No pressure then, Vex said, his tone dry as dust. Just another day in paradise. The command center fell silent, each crew member focused on their tasks, every second a fight against the inevitable. But even as the situation grew more desperate, there was a camaraderie, a shared understanding that they would see this through, come what may. Captain, Phaedra said, a hint of excitement in her voice, I've managed to tweak the signals. We've got the Krillin thinking we've got reinforcements coming in. It's not much, but it might buy us some time. Great work, Phaedra, Vex said, feeling a flicker of hope. Let's keep them on their toes. Outside, the battle continued, a relentless storm of fire and fury. The Krillin ships pressed their advantage, but the humans refused to yield, clinging to their patch of stars with all the stubbornness of a particularly surly mule. Terran reappeared, a look of satisfaction on his face. The drones are running low, but they've done what they can. I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve, though. Hold that thought, Vex said. We might need every trick you've got before this is over. The Krillin assault intensified, each blast a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. But the crew of Dualis stood firm, driven by a determination that no amount of bluster and firepower could extinguish. Captain, we've got a problem, Marlowe said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Multiple breaches on the lower decks. We're losing pressure. Seal off the sections, Vex ordered, his mind racing. We can't afford to lose any more air. Marlowe followed his command, fingers dancing over the controls as she worked to contain the damage. The situation was spiraling, and Vex knew they were running out of options. Suggestions, people? Vex asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. Short of offering the Krillin a cookie and asking them to leave politely, Quill said wryly. We keep fighting, keep improvising. Vex nodded, knowing she was right. They'd come too far to back down now. All right then, let's give them a fight they'll remember. The battle stretched on, each moment a test of endurance and will. The Krillin pressed their assault, relentless and merciless, but the humans fought back with everything they had. They were resourceful, stubborn, and utterly unwilling to go quietly into the night. As the tension mounted, Vex stood at the helm, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. But he was not alone. His crew was with him, each one a crucial part of their ragtag family, united by a common cause. And so, the siege of Dualis continued, a brutal, desperate struggle against the odds. But for Captain Lysander Vex and his crew, defeat was not an option. They would fight, they would endure, and in the end, they would show the Krillin that humans were not so easily crushed. Remember, folks, Vex said, a wry smile on his lips. We might be running on fumes, but at least we're still running. And with that, the battle raged on, a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and the simple, unyielding refusal to give up without a damn good fight. The command center smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, a combination that did little for morale. Captain Lysander Vex leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the latest crisis settle on his shoulders like a particularly malevolent parrot. Outside, the Krillin blockade tightened its noose around Dualis, slowly strangling their hope. We're down to algae paste and recycled water, Marlowe grumbled, her eyes half closed as she scanned the supply reports. I can feel my taste buds revolting against the oppression. Vex rubbed his temple. Great, just what we need, a mutiny of the mouth. Speaking of revolts, Phaedra Quill piped up from across the room. There's a growing faction who think we're all just fancy fireflies waiting to be squashed. Let me guess, they're the same folks who think the moon landing was a hoax, Vex retorted. Or maybe they think the Krillin are just misunderstood diplomats with anger management issues. Something like that, Quill replied, her fingers dancing over the console. People are scared, Vex, hungry. Fear and hunger make a potent cocktail of stupid. Well, we're fresh out of drinks and hors d'oeuvres, Vex muttered. He felt the tension in his neck, each vertebrae screaming in protest. Remind me to schedule a morale-boosting pep talk, right after we invent food out of thin air. How about you invent a new stomach while you're at it, Marlowe quipped. Mine's currently digesting the lining for nutrients. Terran Vex sauntered in, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that might once have been white. If it's any consolation, the drones are still ticking. Though they're starting to get a bit existential about their purpose in life. Maybe they can form a philosophy club with the Krillin, Quill suggested dryly. They can debate the futility of our existence while they try to kill us. Vex chuckled despite himself. I'd pay good money to see a bunch of drones out-rhetoric a Krillin. Phaedra, any more progress on turning those decoy signals into something that'll actually buy us some time? Phaedra sighed, running a hand through her hair. I've got them chasing ghosts, but how long they'll stay in the haunted house is anyone's guess. Long enough for us to figure out how not to be dead would be ideal. Vex leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We need a break and soon, or this is going to turn into the lamest last stand in history. As if on cue, a calm ping interrupted the doom-filled atmosphere. Marlowe flicked a switch on the console. Incoming message, not from a Krillin channel. It's encrypted, but not their usual style. Put it on screen, Vex ordered, his curiosity piqued. The screen flickered to life, revealing a Krillin who looked as out of place on a battlefield as a clown at a funeral. His eyes darted nervously, like someone who had just realized they'd wandered into the wrong neighborhood with a pocket full of cash. Human vessel, he began awkwardly. My name is Thacker, call me Thrack. I wish to defect. Vex blinked, not quite trusting his ears. You want to defect? From the Krillin accord to us, yes, Thrack replied, his voice a mixture of desperation and hope. Things are not as they seem, the accord is. Not what I believed, I wish to help. Vex exchanged glances with his crew. Help us how exactly? Got a spare fleet up your sleeve. I bring information, Thrack said, leaning closer to the camera as if conspiratorially. Weaknesses, strategic data. Enough to give you an edge. Quill raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched into every feature. And in return, what do you want? A set of steak knives, a trip to Disney Planet, Sanctuary, Thrack replied simply, and maybe a chance to make amends. Vex studied the Krillin for a moment. This could be their salvation or their doom, but what choice did they have? All right, Thrack, you've got a deal. But if you double-cross us, I'll personally introduce you to the concept of human hospitality, involving all the recycled airlocks we can find. Thrack nodded, his expression one of relief. I understand. I will transmit the data now. As the transmission ended, Vex turned to his crew. Well, looks like we've got a Krillin friend. Never thought I'd see the day. Does this mean we have to stop making Krillin jokes? Marlowe asked, not entirely joking. Not on my watch, Vex replied. Besides, who knows how long he'll last once he gets a taste of our hospitality? Terran snorted. Hope he likes algae paste. The mood, while not quite jubilant, had lifted a fraction. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it beat the alternative. However, the knowledge of potential dissent among the colonists was a black cloud on the horizon. A meeting was called in the cramped confines of the communal hall, a place that normally smelled of burnt food and regret. Today it was packed with people, their faces a mix of hope and dread. Vex stood before them, hands resting casually on his belt. All right, folks, let's get one thing straight. We're not dead yet, and as long as I'm breathing, I intend to keep it that way. A few grumbles rippled through the crowd as expected. Vex pressed on. I know things are grim, supplies are low, and the Krillin want us as their next trophy, but we've got an ace up our sleeve, information from a Krillin defector. The murmurs grew louder, a mixture of surprise and skepticism. One voice rose above the rest, a lanky man with wild hair and a voice like gravel. And what if this is a trick? What if we're just playing into their hands? Then we'll deal with it like we always do, Vex replied, meeting the man's gaze with steady resolve. By kicking fate in the teeth and rewriting destiny with every shot we take. We're not just survivors, we're the poor bastards who refuse to give up. The room quieted, the dissenters silenced, at least for now. Vex had learned long ago that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about keeping the questions from tearing everyone apart. With the meeting concluded, Vex returned to the command center, feeling both exhausted and invigorated. The siege wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had a chance now. A slim, suicidal chance, but a chance nonetheless. Thrack's data is coming through, Marlowe announced, her eyes scanning the influx on the screen. There's potential here, Vex. Weak points in their formation, places we can exploit. Phaedra leaned over, examining the details. Looks like our new friend wasn't pulling our leg after all. This could turn the tide if we play it right. Let's just hope his information's better than his people skills, Terran quipped. Otherwise, we'll be toast. Vex allowed himself a grim smile. Well, we've got the bread, might as well see if we can't butter it. The battle outside continued to rage, a cosmic brawl that neither side was willing to concede, but inside something had shifted. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a chance to strike back, to take control of their fate. As the Ayers wore on, the data from Thrack proved invaluable. New tactics were devised, fresh strategies formed. Vex and his crew pored over every detail, searching for the crack that would bring the Krillin blockade crashing down, but it wasn't all sunshine and victory laps. The threat of dissent lingered, a simmering tension beneath the surface. Quill had taken it upon herself to keep an ear to the ground, listening for signs of unrest. People are scared, Vex, she said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. They're hungry and tired and ready to snap. We need to give them something to hold on to. Vex nodded, the weight of leadership pressing down like a lead cloak. We will. We just need to hold out a little longer. Once we start winning, the mood will shift. Phaedra gave him a look that said she hoped he was right, but wasn't putting money on it. Well, if nothing else, we've got a Krillin defector to parade around. That should be good for morale. Assuming he doesn't defect back once he tries the food, Terran added. Here's hoping, Vex replied, though deep down he knew the road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. All right, team. Let's make sure our dance with the Krillin doesn't end with us tripping over our own feet. And so they continued, a ragtag group of humans banded together by circumstance and determination, fighting not just for survival, but for the hope of a future beyond the Krillin's oppressive grasp. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they had a real shot at turning the tide. Vex looked around at his crew, each one a piece of this impossible puzzle, and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: optimism. It was a fragile thing, easily crushed and hard-won, but in the void it shone brighter than any star. Captain Lysander Vex stared at the blinking display as if it were a particularly annoying insect buzzing about his face. The data from Thrak, now calling himself Zilnar, because why stick with a name that sounds like a bad cold when you're defecting, was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it was the first real hope they'd had in weeks, a curse because hope often had a way of turning into disappointment. Phaedra Quill, ever the pragmatist, peered over his shoulder. Looks like Zilnar's got a knack for bureaucracy. These Krillin tactical manuals are thicker than a politician's promises. Yeah, but are they any good? Vex asked, not even bothering to mask his skepticism. He'd seen too many brilliant plans end up as debris floating in space. Quill shrugged. Depends on your definition of good. If by good you mean overly detailed and prone to inducing comas, then yes. But there are patterns here, weak links we can yank on till they snap. Terran Fex, ever the grease-stained optimist, leaned back in his chair. Think we can bore them into submission. Maybe hit them with a wall of paperwork so thick they forget why they were trying to kill us in the first place. Wouldn't be the worst plan we've ever had, Vex admitted. Remember the time we rigged a fake distress signal to that asteroid belt and they ended up shooting at rocks for 3 days? Ah, yes, Marlowe chimed in, her eyes still glued to her console. The legendary battle of the brain-dead. Still can't believe we got away with that. Vex cracked a smile. In a universe so intent on grinding them down, sometimes a little gallows humor was all that kept the wheels turning. Quill, what do you make of this data? Any glaring flaws in their armor we can exploit? She scanned the schematics and logistics. The Krillin have a love affair with protocol. They stick to it even when it makes no damn sense. We can use that, hit them where they least expect it, right in the rule book. Not the most thrilling plan, Terran quipped, but I'm all for giving them a bureaucratic aneurysm. Vex nodded. All right, let's make it happen. We've got Zilnar's data. Let's exploit every ounce of stupidity out of it. As the crew gathered in the command center, Vex could feel the tension and anticipation crackling in the recycled air. It smelled of burnt coffee and desperation, the unofficial scent of their little corner of the galaxy. He addressed his team with a casual confidence that belied the chaos of their situation. All right, folks, here's the plan. We use Zilnar's intel to poke holes in their defensive formation. If we're lucky, they'll spend more time bickering over protocol violations than shooting at us. And if we're not lucky, Marlowe asked, raising a tired eyebrow, then we get to find out if being a space pancake is as exciting as it sounds. I hear it's a flat experience, Terran deadpanned. Vex rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a grin. Let's get to work. The hours that followed were a blur of activity and caffeine-fueled strategy sessions. Phaedra Quill, with her knack for turning chaos into opportunity, took the lead in crafting a plan that would exploit the Krillin's rigidity. She cross-referenced Zilnar's data with their own reconnaissance, pinpointing the weak spots like a surgeon searching for a tumor. We hit here, here, and here, she explained, pointing at a holographic map of the Krillin formation. They'll have to reorganize, and that's when we strike again. Keep them off balance, make them question their procedures. Sounds like a dance, Terran said, a mischievous glint in his eye. More like a mosh pit, Marlowe corrected. Only with more screaming and fewer broken noses. Vex watched his crew, a motley band of misfits and outcasts, and felt a surge of pride mixed with the usual dose of existential dread. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was punching above their weight class. As the clock ticked down to the start of their assault, Vex took a moment to gather his thoughts. He stood before his crew, feeling the weight of their lives resting squarely on his shoulders. We're going to be kicking the Krillin right in their procedural guts, he began, glancing at each of them. They think they've got us cornered, but they're about to find out what happens when you back a bunch of stubborn idiots into a corner. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The crew was battle-hardened, their resolve sharp as a plasma blade. Remember, Vex continued, we've got one shot at this. If we time it right, we'll send them scrambling. If we don't, well, let's just say space makes for a lousy funeral parlor. The crew chuckled, a sound more of defiance than amusement. In space, laughter was often the only weapon they had left. All systems are go, Marlowe announced, her fingers flying over the console. Drones prepped and ready. Phaedra's plan is loaded into the nav system. We just need to pull the trigger. Vex nodded, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation mixed with the cold edge of fear. Then let's give those bastards a show they won't forget. The command center fell into a tense silence as the countdown began. Vex watched the seconds tick away, each one a heartbeat pounding in his ears. When the final number lit up, he gave the command. Engage. The ship lurched into motion, the hum of the engines a familiar comfort. Out in the void, the maintenance drones, now armed to the teeth and itching for action, darted forward like a swarm of mechanical hornets. They flitted through the Krillin blockade, the enemy ships caught off guard by the sudden and unexpected assault. Phaedra's plan was a thing of chaotic beauty. The drones hit the predetermined weak points with precision, sowing confusion and disorder among the Krillin ranks. As the enemy scrambled to adapt, the crew launched Phase 2, an all-out barrage aimed at their exposed flanks. Look at them, Terran said, pointing at the chaotic scene unfolding on the view screen. Like a bunch of headless chickens, or legless crabs, Marlowe added. Either way, they're floundering. Vex allowed himself a moment's satisfaction as the Krillin formation buckled under the pressure. It was working. Against all odds, their plan was working, but the victory was far from assured. The Krillin were nothing if not persistent, and they quickly regrouped, their ships converging on Vex's position with methodical precision. Incoming fighters, Marlowe warned, her voice steady but urgent. They're not happy we've crashed their little party. Let's give them a reason to regret it, Vex replied, his mind racing. Phaedra, any chance we can make them chase another ghost? Already on it, she said, fingers dancing over the console. Deploying decoys now. The Krillin ships veered off course, chasing the phantom signals with predictable stubbornness. Vex felt a flicker of admiration for their determination, even if it was directed at imaginary targets. All right, people, he called out. Let's show them what happens when you underestimate a bunch of desperate humans. The crew fought with everything they had, maneuvering through the chaos with the kind of reckless abandon that only came from having nothing left to lose. The Krillin ships, their unity shattered, were forced into disarray, their defensive lines crumbling under the relentless assault. In the command center, the atmosphere was tense but upbeat. The crew worked in near-perfect harmony, each action feeding into the next like a well-oiled machine. Vex could see the change in his people, a spark of hope kindling in eyes that had been dulled by despair. But the Krillin weren't finished yet. As the battle raged on, they launched a final, desperate counterattack, their ships converging in a last-ditch effort to crush Vex and his crew. Brace for impact, Vex shouted, gripping the edge of his console as the ship shuddered under the onslaught. The view screen lit up with the blaze of energy weapons, the hull groaning in protest as the Krillin fighters pressed their attack. Vex felt the tremors of each hit, the deck vibrating beneath his feet. Shields failing, Marlowe reported, her voice tight with stress. We're not going to last much longer at this rate. Then let's make sure we take as many of them with us as we can, Vex replied grimly. Terran, get those drones back in the fight. Phaedra, we need another distraction. I'm on it, she said, her focus unyielding. Deploying countermeasures now. The ship's systems responded to her commands, launching a barrage of electronic pulses that sent the Krillin sensors into a tailspin. The enemy ships faltered, their formations dissolving into chaos once more. It was the opening they needed. With a rallying cry, Vex and his crew pushed forward, pressing their advantage with a ferocity that left the Krillin reeling. The tide was turning, the once impenetrable blockade cracking under the relentless assault. Victory was within sight, but Vex knew better than to count his chickens before they hatched, or before their eggs got scrambled by enemy fire. He kept his focus, driving his crew onward with the kind of grim determination that had become second nature. As the battle reached its climax, the Krillin forces finally began to retreat, their ships withdrawing in disarray. The blockade was broken, the path to freedom clear at last. Cheers erupted in the command center, the sound of hard-won triumph echoing through the corridors. Vex allowed himself a moment of relief, the weight on his shoulders lifting ever so slightly. Well, I'll be damned, he said, a tired smile tugging at his lips. We did it. We sure did, Terran replied, clapping him on the back. Not bad for a bunch of misfit toy soldiers. Phaedra nodded, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. Looks like Zilnar's intel was the real deal. Guess we owe him a thank you. Vex chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, and maybe a decent meal too. Assuming he survives the algae paste. As the crew celebrated their hard-fought victory, Vex couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. They'd faced insurmountable odds, stared death in the face more times than he cared to count, and somehow they'd come out on top. For now, at least, they had a chance, a slim, precarious chance, to carve out a future of their own making, and that was worth everything. All right, team, Vex said, his voice carrying over the din. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but for now, let's savor this victory. We've earned it. The crew cheered once more, their spirits buoyed by the promise of a new dawn. In the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, they'd found a way to not just survive, but to thrive. And for Captain Lysander Vex, that was more than enough. The command center was buzzing with the usual blend of tension and caffeine-induced jitters when Lysander Vex strolled in, coffee in hand. The scent of burnt beans and recycled desperation clung to the air like a bad metaphor in a poetry contest. Vex took a deep breath, savoring the aroma. Ah, the smell of another glorious day in the ascent of the universe, he quipped. Morning, Captain, Marlowe greeted, her eyes barely visible over the mountain of screens and readouts. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Then again, who needed sleep when you had nerves of titanium and a bloodstream full of synthetic adrenaline? The Krillins sent us another love letter overnight. Let me guess, Vex said. Something about how our resistance is futile and we should embrace the warm, gooey embrace of oblivion. How original. Pretty much, Marlowe replied, stifling a yawn. They even added some new graphics this time. Very swanky. Nice to see they're putting our taxpayer credits to good use, Vex smirked, leaning over to peer at the console. The Krillin propaganda was a mess of overly dramatic visuals and pompous alien rhetoric. Real highbrow stuff. Any sign they're ready to pack it in? Not a chance, Phaedra Quill chimed in, looking up from her station. They're still sitting pretty, probably waiting for us to keel over from sheer boredom. Joke's on them, Vex said. I'm already dead inside. Phaedra cracked a rare smile before getting back to work. She was a cerebral type, always 3 steps ahead, and probably the only one who understood the tactical manuals she was dissecting. Thanks to Zilnar's intel, I've got a plan that'll make the Krillins think we're as harmless as a class of preschoolers. Preschoolers with plasma rifles, Terran Fex added, his optimism undented by the hostile universe around him. You know, in case they get any cute ideas. Exactly, Phaedra agreed. We lull them into a false sense of security, then we strike when they least expect it. Operation Lullaby and Boom, Vex declared, raising his coffee in a mock toast. Let's put these bastards to bed. The mood in the command center shifted, an undercurrent of anticipation buzzing beneath the surface. Phaedra's plan involved a series of dull, predictable maneuvers designed to bore the Krillins into complacency. Not exactly the kind of thing that made for thrilling war stories, but in this case, dullness was a weapon. For Ayers, the crew executed the plan with an almost mechanical precision. They sent the drones on routine patrols, transmitted the same inane broadcasts, and generally acted like a ship with nowhere to be and nothing to do. It was the kind of tactical genius that involved a lot of sitting around and pretending to suck at their jobs. Think they'll buy it? Terran asked, lounging in his chair with the casual air of a man who'd already checked out mentally. Krillins aren't known for their imagination, Marlowe said, rubbing her eyes. If we pretend to be useless long enough, they'll assume it's our natural state, and then they'll drop their guard, Phaedra added. That's when we hit them with everything we've got. Ayers turned into daze, and the Krillins watched, waited, and slowly let their vigilance slip. The blockade tightened, but the enemy's focus waned, their attention drifting as they assumed the humans had finally succumbed to tedium. Vex watched the holographic display, noting the subtle shifts in the Krillins' formation. Their ships drifted, patrols became less frequent, and their responses to probes grew sluggish. It was working. As tedium set in, the Krillins started seeing the humans as more of an annoyance than a threat. Time to kick them where it counts, Vex said, a spark in his eye. Marlowe, ready the drones. Terran, get your best toys out. Phaedra, you know what to do. The crew sprang into action, the atmosphere in the command center crackling with renewed energy. They'd spent enough time playing possum. Now it was time for the rattlesnake to strike. The drones, those once humble maintenance machines, turned mechanical nightmares, buzzed to life, their plasma cutters gleaming with deadly intent. The Krillins had never been particularly fond of surprises, especially not the kind that came with high-yield explosives attached. Let's give them a show, Vex grinned, nodding to Marlowe. With deft fingers, Marlowe triggered the sequence that set their plan in motion. The drones swarmed, a metallic cloud of chaos breaking through the Krillin ranks with surgical precision. They hit the weak points Phaedra had identified, creating a cascading failure of systems and leaving the aliens fumbling like blind men in a dark room. Look at them scatter, Terran laughed, eyes wide with delight. It's like watching ants when you kick over their hill. And we've got the boot, Marlowe added, her voice tinged with satisfaction as the Krillins scrambled to regain control. The command center erupted in a controlled frenzy, each crew member playing their part in the symphony of destruction. Phaedra unleashed a series of decoys and electronic warfare measures, sending the Krillin sensors into a tailspin. The enemy's confusion was palpable, their ships struggling to coordinate as their formation disintegrated under the relentless assault. Incoming transmission from the Krillin flagship, Marlowe announced, her tone suggesting she was already preparing to be unimpressed. Patch it through, Vex said, sipping his coffee as if he had all the time in the world. The screen flickered to life, revealing the stern visage of a Krillin commander, his expression as sour as a lemon soaked in vinegar. Human vessel, he barked, his voice dripping with the kind of self-importance only a species with tentacle envy could muster. Cease your hostilities immediately or face total annihilation. Vex raised an eyebrow. You mean the kind of annihilation where you sit there getting your ass handed to you while we turn your blockade into a junkyard? Yeah, we're good, thanks. The commander sputtered, his composure cracking like an egg under a sledgehammer. This is an act of war, buddy, Vex replied. If this is what you call war, I'd hate to see what you do for fun. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the humans to their work. The Krillins might have been tenacious, but their pride was a chink in their armor, a flaw Vex and his crew were more than willing to exploit. All right, people, Vex called out. Let's keep up the pressure. We break them here, we break them for good. The command center hummed with activity, each crew member a cog in the machine of their mutual survival. The Krillin blockade, once an impenetrable wall of hostility, was now a crumbling edifice, its foundation shaken by the relentless onslaught. As the battle raged on, the Krillins launched a desperate counterattack, their ships converging in a last-ditch effort to stave off defeat. Energy weapons flared, and the ship shuddered under the impact, but Vex was undeterred. "Brace yourselves," he shouted, their ship groaning like an old man getting out of a too-small chair. "Marlowe, where are we with the decoys?" "Deploying now," she replied, her hands a blur as she executed the maneuver. The ship's systems responded, sending out a series of false signals that danced across the enemy's sensors like ghosts at a haunted house. The Krillin ships hesitated, their pursuit faltering as they chased phantom targets, the real threat slipping through their fingers like sand in a sieve. It was the opening Vex needed. "Hit them with everything," Vex ordered, his voice steady amidst the chaos. The humans surged forward, pressing their advantage with a ferocity born of desperation and the kind of blind optimism only the truly insane could muster. The Krillin formation crumbled, their ships retreating under the onslaught, their blockade shattered. Cheers erupted in the command center, the sound of victory ringing through the air like the sweet sound of a cash register dinging to life. Vex leaned back, a weary grin on his face, as the Krillin forces retreated, their ships fleeing in disarray. "Looks like they had enough," Terran said, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Can you believe it? We actually pulled it off. Not bad for a bunch of overcaffeinated, sleep-deprived lunatics," Marlowe agreed, stretching her arms over her head. Phaedra nodded, her expression a blend of satisfaction and exhaustion. "Seems Zilnar's intel was worth more than its weight in algae paste." Vex chuckled, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. "Guess we owe him more than just a thank you. Maybe even a seat at the table, if he can stomach our cooking." As the crew celebrated, Vex took a moment to reflect on the sheer improbability of their success. They'd faced down the Krillin Accord, stared into the abyss, and somehow come out the other side with their sanity more or less intact. "All right, team," he said, raising his coffee in a toast. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but for now, let's savor this victory. We've earned it." The crew cheered again, their spirits buoyed by the promise of a new dawn. In the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, they'd managed not just to survive, but to thrive. Lysander Vex watched his crew, a motley band of misfits and outcasts who'd proven that even when the universe was out to get you, sometimes you just needed to hit back with a little creative violence and a hell of a lot of gallows humor. For now, they'd won, and in a universe that seemed hell-bent on making them fail, that was more than enough. Captain Lysander Vex surveyed the aftermath from the bridge of his ship, the command center still buzzing with an air of triumph. The Krillin blockade, once thought to be impenetrable, now lay in tatters, their ships retreating with tails metaphorically tucked between their legs. The humans had not only survived, but had given a cosmic middle finger to the odds. "Well, that was fun," Vex said, stretching as if dismissing a minor inconvenience from his day. "Who knew pretending to be incompetent could pay off so well? I'm just surprised they bought it," Lieutenant Marlowe quipped, still rubbing the exhaustion from her eyes. "It's like they've never met a government employee before." Phaedra Quill, the strategic mastermind behind their unlikely victory, leaned back in her chair, tapping her console with a satisfaction that only comes after making the universe your personal chessboard. "They had the tactical acuity of a banana," she said dryly. "And not the genetically modified kind. And to think we owe this win to those old maintenance drones," Terran Vex added, nodding toward the window where the remnants of battle drifted lazily through space. "I'll never look at a rusty bucket of bolts the same way again." As the crew bantered, Vex's gaze drifted to the planet below, Dualis, a beleaguered colony that had been on the brink of despair just days before. Now, with the Krillin blockade broken, a sliver of hope glimmered in the vast darkness of space. "All right, let's not pat ourselves on the back too hard," Vex cautioned, though his grin betrayed him. "There's still a hell of a lot to do. For starters, cleaning up this mess before the Krillins change their minds and come back with reinforcements." Marlowe gave a dramatic sigh, clearly not looking forward to the space equivalent of sweeping up after a particularly unruly party. "You know, for once, I'd like to have a victory that doesn't involve 3 weeks of cleanup. Think of it as cardio," Vex replied, sipping his coffee. Keeps you in shape for when the next wave of homicidal aliens show up. Ahead of you there, Terran chimed in, already coordinating the maintenance drones to begin repairs. The mechanical piranhas, now more akin to diligent ants, buzzed around, fixing and salvaging what they could. Amidst the flurry of activity, the crew received an unexpected transmission. Zilnar, the defector whose intel had turned the tide, appeared on the holo screen, his blue skin a stark contrast to the utilitarian backdrop of their ship. Captain Vex, Zilnar began, his voice as smooth as the alien alloy he was offering them. I see your people are quite effective when motivated. The Krillin Accord may have underestimated you, but I did not. Yes, well, we humans have a knack for making do with what we've got, Vex replied, leaning forward. And right now that's not a lot, but thanks for the heads up, it made all the difference. Zilnar inclined his head, a gesture of respect or perhaps simply acknowledgement that humans were not as dull-witted as they appeared. I must admit watching their fleet scatter was satisfying, more satisfying than algae paste, Marlowe interjected, a twinkle in her eye, because that's about as good as it gets around here. The blue alien chuckled, a rare sound that echoed in the confines of their ship. I would be honored to join your eclectic crew. Your hospitality may lack culinary refinement, but your spirit is undeniable. Vex considered the offer, then nodded. Welcome aboard, Zilnar, but be warned, survival doesn't come with a meal plan. It comes with a lot of bad jokes and even worse coffee. With Zilnar's asylum settled, the humans turned their attention back to Dualis. The colony was buzzing with the first genuine signs of recovery. Ration lines shortened, and the streets, though still haunted by the specter of war, slowly began to bustle with life once more. Phaedra oversaw the distribution of remaining supplies, coordinating with colony leaders to ensure that no one went hungry while repairs were underway. The strategic thinker in her found satisfaction in the logistical challenge. The human in her found solace in acts of small kindness. You know, she mused aloud to no one in particular as she organized cargo manifests. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that don't involve plasma rifles. Terran, overhearing her, replied with a grin. I like convincing people to eat algae paste and like it. As the days slipped by, the crew focused on rebuilding, their collective exhaustion gradually giving way to a gritty determination. They patched up the colony's defenses, reinforcing the planetary shield generators that had once buckled under Krillin assault. Vex often found himself in the thick of it, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty from work that was more manual labor than he'd like to admit. As the captain, he knew the importance of leading by example, even if that meant wielding a wrench instead of a command console. Captain, Phaedra said, catching him during a rare break. The Krillins have gone silent. Our intel suggests they're licking their wounds, not planning an immediate return. Good, Vex replied, wiping sweat from his brow. Gives us time to reinforce and maybe, just maybe, catch a breather. The Krillin Accord's silence was a welcome reprieve, but Vex knew it wouldn't last. They were a prideful bunch, and he fully expected them to come back for round 2 once their egos had sufficiently healed. But for now, the humans had a chance to survey the landscape of opportunity that lay ahead. Diplomatic envoys from other alien factions began to trickle in, drawn by tales of human resilience and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. These weren't the kind of visitors who came with lasers blazing. Instead, they bore gifts of trade and potential alliances. One delegation, the Hellions, arrived with offerings of advanced agricultural tech, promising to turn Dualis's barren soil into fertile ground. Their representative, an elegant creature with a halo of bioluminescent tendrils, approached Vex with a curious mix of admiration and trepidation. Captain Vex, the Hellion began, their voice as smooth as liquid light. We have heard of your triumph. The stars speak of your deeds, and we wish to learn. Vex chuckled, shaking his head. Not sure what the stars are smoking, but it's probably not good for you. We're just doing what we have to. The Hellion smiled, a gesture that seemed to light up the air around them. In doing so, you have inspired. We offer our technology to aid in your rebuilding efforts. Great, Vex replied, accepting the offer with a nod. Because right now, our idea of agriculture is seeing who can grow mold the fastest. With new alliances forming, the crew of misfits found themselves at the heart of a burgeoning network of interstellar relations. It was strange, Vex mused, how adversity could turn strangers into allies and enemies into regrets. As the first sprouts of vegetation took root on Dualis, the colony slowly transformed from a symbol of defiance to a beacon of hope. The people, once numbed by fear and scarcity, began to believe in the possibility of a future beyond survival. Marlowe, ever the skeptic, watched from the sidelines with a smirk. Look at them, she said, nodding toward a group of colonists planting seeds under the guidance of Hellion agri-technicians. It's like watching someone actually believe in a politician's promises. Hey, even a broken system gets fixed eventually, Terran replied, his optimism shining through as always. You just have to hit it enough times. Vex stood back, observing the scene with a sense of satisfaction that came less from victory and more from the promise of stability. The crew had come a long way, from a ragtag group barely holding it together to unlikely saviors of a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. "Don't get too comfortable," he warned, though his tone was light. "We've still got a universe full of who knows what ready to throw a wrench in our plans." "Yet," Phaedra agreed, crossing her arms with a wry smile. "But for now, let's enjoy the calm before the next storm." As the crew settled into a semblance of normalcy, their bond strengthened by shared experiences, Vex realized that their greatest asset wasn't their cunning or technology, it was their resilience in the face of the absurdly unpredictable. In a universe where chaos reigned supreme, where logic often took a backseat to luck, it seemed that having a crew who could laugh in the face of impending doom was worth more than all the plasma rifles in the galaxy. So they rebuilt, turning the debris of destruction into the foundation for a new beginning. And as they did, they couldn't help but laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it all, because sometimes when the universe gave you lemons, you had to blow those lemons up and make a spectacle out of it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the secret to surviving the long night of space. Not just surviving, but living, finding humor in the darkness, camaraderie in chaos, and victory in the most unlikely places. For Captain Lysander Vex and his crew, it was enough.